All right, everybody, welcome to Legal Tech Week for June 12th, 2020. This is Bob Ambrogi, and we're being joined by a guest this week, Rohan Pavalori, the CEO and co-founder of Upsolve, to talk about an article he wrote this week that was kind of in the news. A lot of people were talking about it. We also have a new panelist joining us this week, Victoria Hudgens from
Hey guys.
Tech News. Victoria, how you doing? Welcome.
Doing good.
And other than that, some of the usual panelists are back. Let's go around and just quickly introduce each other. Yourselves. Molly, start with you.
Hi, I'm Molly McDonough. I'm a legal affairs writer and editor and media consultant based in the Chicago area.
And Joe?
Joe Patrice from Above the Law. I'm in New York. I guess now we should say where we're all from, because we're all from all over the place, I guess. Yeah.
We are. Nikki
Black. I am the legal technology evangelist with My Case Law Practice Management Software. I'm also a legal tech journalist. I write regular legal tech columns for ABA Journal, Above the Law, Daily Record. I also write for the My Case blog, and I am in Rochester, New York.
So you've got one of those great titles. Who was the guy like a week ago or something who had the title of "I Get Shit Done" or something like that?
Yeah, that was better than mine. I saw that one. I thought,
Stephen Allen.
Right.
That's a good one for sure.
And Caroline, what's your title?
Yeah, pretty much I get shit done too. Other people might not say that. Caroline Hill, editor, legal IT and designer, aka You're a Drag. I'm based in the UK in East Sussex, which, as I was just saying before we went live, is where Winnie the Pooh is from.
And Caroline is thrilled that we're doing this earlier this week because it's not past her bedtime when she's joining us. So what we're going to do today is speak with Rohan a little bit, for maybe 15 minutes or so, and then go into our regular roundtable on the week's top stories. But Rohan wrote a really interesting story this week on Law 360 basically on the question of whether unauthorized practice of law rules promote racial injustice in this country. So Rohan, why don't you just kind of begin by summing up what you had to say about that?
Thanks so much, Bob, for having me and for everyone. So, I'm sure this audience all knows about UPL rules in America that grant a monopoly to lawyers on providing legal advice. And every day in my job, helping low-income families through the process of accessing their civil legal rights, in particular with bankruptcy, I'm exposed to countless poor people in this country that can't afford lawyers. And in our civil justice system, those people don't have the same rights as everyone else because they can't afford the lawyers to help them access those rights. And one of the reasons why these lawyers are not affordable for folks is because there aren't enough helpers around. And unauthorized practice of the law rules as they exist today constrain the supply of people who can provide meaningful legal assistance, and as a result, drive up the price of accessing legal rights in this country. And I think one thing that's important in this discussion is to be clear that I'm not proposing getting rid of UPL rules in America. I believe in UPL rules. I believe in regulation. But as they exist today, where only people who go to 3 years of law school and pass that bar exam being able to provide meaningful legal assistance, that to me doesn't make any sense. I think it's obvious that we can create other alternative forms of training to vet and qualify people to provide legal assistance in certain areas, especially the ones I care about in poverty law.
I think you're muted.
Having all sorts of technical difficulties. Our Facebook Live just went dead, and I'm just trying to restart that. I thought it was really interesting that you brought that up this week, because this also happened to be the week in which the state of Washington decided to discontinue its LLLT, limited license legal technician program, which, you know, kind of fed into what you're talking about in the sense that it was a way for people who couldn't afford 3 years of law school and the time and expense and everything else to become a licensed legal services provider of a sort. I was really disappointed to hear that news. I mean, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that program failed for two main reasons. One, the barrier to entry was way too high. And two, one of the reasons the barrier to entry was too high is because the wrong people were the regulators. If you have a Supreme Court and a Bar Association as the regulators, then it's obvious that a program like that is destined to fail from the beginning. So I think that those are the main two reasons why a program like that didn't succeed. And but I think we learned a lot. And in my industry, in technology, when something doesn't work out, you don't give up, you iterate. And the vision of the program was in the right direction. Let us create more helpers, make the barrier to entry lower for becoming a helper. Let's limit the people who can provide help to certain areas of the law that are more commoditized. And I have no doubt that if they use what they learned and iterated, they'd be able to achieve some successful outcome in the future.
Does anybody on the panel have any questions or comments on this that they want to bring up?
I mean, I would just echo that. The biggest disappointment for me was the abandoning of the entire project instead of looking at what wasn't working and adjusting or shifting to make sure that it was less bureaucratic, less complicated to work through, and open it up so that the services were meaningful and provided instead of just tossing it out the window. I thought it was working really well. I thought a lot of good lessons learned. It helped develop sandboxes in other areas that are hopefully going to continue and learn from what didn't work there. And instead of abandoning it, just iterate, like Rohan said.
And Bob, one thing that I think that we don't talk about enough when it comes to civil justice reform is the racial justice component. That's why I brought it up this week in particular. In the criminal justice reform movement, they've talked about how Black men are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated. And in the civil justice, we often talk about socioeconomic status, but class and race are intertwined in America due to centuries of oppressions and slavery. And to not talk about race when it comes to talking about housing or access to family lawyers, that is a real problem. And I really think this should be a bipartisan issue. On the right, the conservatives should really focus on how the existing monopoly we've given to lawyers is anti-democratic, and that it has an unnecessary bureaucracy associated with it. I mean, you have the Koch brothers arguing against licensing laws across the country and for things like hair braiding, et cetera. And then on the left, this is really an issue of social justice. And to be against UPL reform is to say that you do not believe there is a more creative way to train people to provide lower cost legal services. And to me, that demonstrates a lack of imagination. If you really believe there's absolutely no way we can rewrite UPL laws in America.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you're good. Vicky? Oh, one of the things in the UK, so we've obviously got a lot more deregulation in the UK.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they've done is open up the entry to the profession as well, which I think is essential in terms of recognizing, so rather than just having one route where you know everyone has to go in the same line, which means that it's less likely to be diverse, you know, down to cost and all sorts of reasons. Actually, if you're a paralegal or if you're all sorts of different things, they've now made it possible for you to move into a training contract much more easily within a corporate department or whatever it might be. They've opened up all these different channels to make it much more accessible, and I think that's also probably a big factor, you know, in terms of being more all embracing and recognizing we have lots of different statuses as well in terms of the types of, you know, paralegals and assistants, etc. So I think that, and actually it'd be I must revisit in terms of, because that was fairly recent. But it'll be interesting to monitor that and in terms of what impact that has had on diversity.
And I mean, we also need to, I mean, unfortunately, this is kind of a wonky subject, UPL reform. I think it's one of the most important topics in a democracy I mean, accessing your rights is just, it's a civil rights issue. I mean, UPL reform is a civil rights issue. And it's a shame that we haven't brought it to the forefront of our national dialogue. I mean, that's something I'm obviously trying to do. But it really limits the amount of democracy that some people get because it limits who can actually afford to access their rights. So I really see UPL reform in this specific moment as potentially rising in international dialogue. That's my hope.
Did you get much? What kind of feel? It sounds like obviously everyone's been talking about your article. Has there been anything, in terms of what sort of feedback have you been getting? Do you think it's obviously been helpful in raising the issue? Has there been any kind of reaction that you think has been really helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I am very hopeful of opportunities in Utah and California. Obviously, people are talking about those right now. I had a chance yesterday to talk to one of the committee members of the Utah reforms that are going on and hoping to get more involved and trying to be helpful there. I think one of the challenges is, of course, attracting people to provide these alternative forms of legal services, and figuring out a way to encourage that at scale is also an interesting operational problem that requires strong leadership in each of these states. It's not like you can just change the rules and overnight all of these alternative service providers are going to show up. You need to encourage that as well. And maybe that's one of the issues with what happened in Washington. Not you can, if you build it, people will come. If you change the laws, people aren't going to come. And you need to encourage alternative providers.
Well, I am a little conflicted on the UPL amendment. And I come from and this is why. I was a public defender for years, and I was on the board of Monroe County Legal Assistance for years. And the Monroe County Legal Assistance Corp provided people of low income with access to the civil side of the criminal justice system, and free attorneys if they qualified through that. So I've always felt like it's the government's responsibility to provide this, but the problem is that what has happened, even under Obama, because the Republicans had the majority in the Senate, they have essentially defunded LSC. So that's the problem. That's the way I think it ought to work. But the problem with that is that it is a political issue, and as a result, you can't have access to justice. And even then, LSC did not provide incredible access to justice. It just filled a small gap, sort of, or a large gap, sort of. But, at the end of the day, that's the problem, is because it is a political issue, that access comes and goes depending on who has political power. And that's the problem with that. But I still think that that's the way a society should operate. There should be access to justice for everyone. And I guess the innovation is, how are we going to fill these access to justice gaps without relying upon the sway of political opinion and thought. So but I still sort of fundamentally believe that's the way to do it. It's just not working because it's imperfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think my view is it'd be great if everybody could have a lawyer. I see that as a political non-reality. So we need to think creatively around how to address the problem. And I think there's another a solution that's tied in my mind with UPL reform, which is redesigning our courts that serve low-income people around the assumption that people won't have lawyers. I actually think it's such a crazy thing that we've designed housing court, consumer bankruptcy courts, consumer debt collection courts, uncontested divorces around the assumption that people can afford lawyers, when the majority of people, for example, who are filing for bankruptcy have negative net worths that are in the tens of thousands of dollars. And how crazy is it that we expect people to be able to pay for lawyers when they're in tens of thousands of dollars of debt, and that we haven't even thought twice about how that system might be reformed? So we need to redesign our court system around the assumption that people are going to be pro se, because that's the reality. And I feel very strongly about that as well.
Well, and I'll just add to that, to the redesign, it's more about looking at, where solutions get bogged down into the system. And a lot of it is at those earlier stages that aren't designed well and open enough. And so if the courts themselves opened up the processes to make them less complicated, more accessible, automated forms, easy to use tools, in multiple languages, in plain language, and with navigators to help people through that process, then it frees up the courts and lawyers to take on that high-skilled work that ends up being disputed, and that's a fraction of what we see actually go to court. So, but yet the courts are bogged down with hearings and status checks and these complex processes that just aren't necessary.
And I think I want to be clear, especially when it comes to the conversation of the last 2 weeks. I think, and my own experience over the last 3 or 4 years running Upsolve, is that there's a great degree of elitism and racism. And I really do feel that part of the reason these changes haven't taken place is because the legal profession itself, there's this prestige and elitism intertwined with becoming a lawyer in America that people want to hold on to, and to the detriment, oftentimes, of poor people and Black people and brown people in this country.
Well, there was a question from somebody who's watching asking what changes should have been made to the LLLT program in Washington to make it useful for providers and to consumers. The rules in place sounded onerous as they were. I think that point's kind of already been made that the rules were onerous, but what changes should have been made to it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, reducing the barrier to entry. I think there's a certain amount of credit hours and work hours that nobody in their right mind, if they cared about feeding their own family, would have fulfilled. So that's number one in my mind. And then number two is, in my understanding, is that they limited it to only one area of the law. I think it was only family law, and opening it up, because you always need to think from a market perspective, like what is going to make this attractive for the helpers as well, and because they're going to need to feed their own families. So I don't think the approach was pragmatic enough.
Yeah,
it strikes me one of the problems with limiting it to one area of law is, and this is a problem I have a lot of times when in the media business too, when people want to do a new thing, the answer is not do a lower scale version of what you want, but instead to build a part of the thing you want. The difference between, I want to build a luxury car, instead of starting with a bad car, you start with, why don't we get in the axle business, which doesn't really give you enough to build on or to see whether or not you're succeeding. And when they decided to just be limited in practice area, that means you don't get the opportunity to get people coming in from different vectors. Only people who are interested in that one thing. And that means it's a small enough sample. It's always got kind of destined to not get the results you want.
Right. And and that's sort of one of my fears in Utah is just like a small population. There's a risk of there being an innovative solution, but just the fact that it's in a state and it's in a small state. I mean, that's one of the big problems with legal tech innovation in America. I mean, B2C consumer legal tech, which is specifically my field and one that I care deeply about. I mean, one of the reasons is there's so many different state-by-state differences. And all of a sudden, when there's these UPL differences that are state-by-state, and you subject yourself to regulators in every state, I mean, what entrepreneur in their right mind who's trying to make a big impact on the world is going to choose consumer legal tech as the place? I see just unless states are working together moving forward, there's going to be problems in attracting entrepreneurial solutions.
And ironically, there were proposals pending in Washington to expand the LLT program into other practice areas. I think it was housing and maybe consumer debt. There was one other one, I forget what it was. And that also probably would have helped address the budget issue, because part of the issue here was just the cost of running the program. And the more practice areas you're in, the more people you can attract to be participating in the program, and the less strain on the budget you would have. So, well, anybody have any other questions for Rohan before we let him go? Well, I really appreciate you taking the time this morning to be with us and share your thoughts on this. It was a really great article, really provocative. I'm glad. I really liked seeing it sort of reframe the UPL issue in a way as a racial justice issue, because it's so often an access to justice issue, which is not, they're not separate things, but it's a different way to think about it and look at it. And I thought that was great.
Of course, and just two last things I'll say,
Yeah.
which one part of the article was about the lack of Black and brown people in the legal profession, and I like to pose this thought experiment. I mean, do you think our system would exist this way if there were fewer white people and more Black and brown people from specifically socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds? I mean, I have no doubt that we'd have a different system today if the legal profession was more diverse, and that there was lower barrier to entry to the legal industry. And then the second thing is, and this will help me frame it for myself, if I have a mom who's been sued by a debt collector and needs somebody to represent her in court, am I more likely to want her to be helped by somebody who's done a specific training module for debt collection lawsuits, and is a social worker by training? Or am I going to want her to be represented by a lawyer who just passed the bar and has no specific training and is Googling around to learn about debt collection? I think for me, that just helps me grasp that there is an alternative to our current system. We just need to find it and fight for it. So thank you so much, everyone, for having me.
Thank you, Rohan.
Thanks. And you can either leave, or if you want, I can change your role to an attendee and you can continue to watch the rest of it. But
thank you so much. Cool.
Yeah, all right.
Thank
We'll
you.
see. Guess you didn't want to watch the rest of us. I don't know. We're so fascinating. So, well, all right. So we, usually we talk in advance about some of the stories that we want to throw around here on the roundtable. We haven't really done that this week, so we can surprise each other a little bit, but free for all. But since Victoria is new to our panel, let's Victoria, give you the honors of kicking off with something that's something in the news that struck you this week. What were you looking at?
Yeah, definitely this week at ALM, which is the parent company of Legal Tech News, we've definitely been covering just how the legal industry isn't in a bubble or in a vacuum, like the protests going on in the United States and internationally, and how law firms are adjusting and responding to it. And it's been kind of interesting to hear some Black lawyers provide like how they've responded to it, and law firms saying how they want to promote diversity and inclusion. And an article that I wrote this week looked into mostly solo practitioners and lawyers at small law firms that decided to use social media, Twitter or Facebook, to post that they would provide pro bono services to peaceful protesters that were arrested. And a lot of their tweets and posts went viral, and I talked to them about what's kind of been the impact of that. And mostly they said that they received positive insights, positive feedback from people and a few clients, and also kind of like ugly backlash. And I thought it was interesting, and everyone was just kind of, they would say usually that it was a misconception of who they were providing services for. And some people were just saying like, hey, you're providing services to looters or the bad guys or something like that. And I thought it was interesting just talking to the lawyers about like balancing their workload and why they decided to offer those services and put that out there through social media. And everyone pretty much, even if they had a little bit of backlash, everyone seemed like they still wanted to continue to do the work. And I thought it was kind of interesting. You see in the big, large law firms kind of saying like, oh, we'll put more money towards matters and initiatives, and these lawyers taking it out of their time to like provide pro bono services to protesters. That was kind of interesting to see a law firm's initial response.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's always interesting to see how social media can be used by lawyers in that way. I was thinking back as you were talking to the early days of the Trump administration, when there was the first wave of immigration crackdown, and Twitter became a very powerful tool for connecting lawyers and others who were trying to help out around that. And I don't think there was the backlash at that time. It's interesting, or maybe there was. Maybe I was just tuned out to it, but it seemed to be much more, sort of just generally well received as a vehicle for connecting lawyers and getting them to the front lines to be able to help people. But,
yeah, I did kind of notice that with the large law firms, they definitely did make announcements to their staff and lawyers about like, we hear what's going on, and we're going to promote diversity initiatives. I think it was one of the larger law firms. I can't remember the firm, but he said he wants to put together like a consortium of big law and legal service providers to provide like pro bono services. But I thought it was interesting that it was the lawyers in the small firms, regional firms, that decided, like, hey, I'm actually going to put my resources towards helping people that are that were peaceful protesters that were arrested in their area. So I thought it was interesting.
Well, it's funny that Caroline,
you go.
Well, it's funny that I just think it's funny that you even mentioned that, because I just got an email this morning from lawyer in Western New York, in Buffalo, which is an hour west of me, in response to my Above the Law article, which I wanted to talk about later. But it was about information for protesters to help them protest and preserve their rights. And he was letting me know that he represented what was willing to represent protesters for free. And so I shared that. I run a Rochester, New York rallies page where I share information about all the rallies. And so I posted that on there so that people that get arrested will know. But it's funny they mentioned that, because there's someone right in my area that's doing that. They wanted to make sure that I knew about it as a journalist so that I could share the news. So it's so interesting to see. And it's great to see lawyers willing to use their skills in this way, pro bono, to help, move this effort along and support it. So I think it's great that you highlighted that in your story too, because it's an important way that lawyers can make a difference. So
what I was going to say, so it seems like, I think we said last week that anything's better than silence, and a lot of law firms have been making statements and talking about racial diversity, which is good, and they're talking about pro bono and giving more money to organisations. But I was just wondering what you've seen in terms of making commitments. So obviously you did a really interesting survey of the top 50, or maybe that was the UK arm of law.com, but where it showed that statistically the top firms in terms of racial diversity had less than 5% of people of colour within the firm. And I just wondered if you've seen much in terms of firms really committing to metrics themselves, in terms of diversity metrics. I don't know sorry to put you on the spot, but this is something that I'm writing right now, and just looking at whether there's any. It's all very well to say, right, we're going to do more pro bono work, but actually I feel like they're not turning the microscope on themselves enough and going, right, we really need to make some serious commitments right now, because I don't think it's enough personally just to donate more. I think they need to really start to make some, and we talked about this last week in the panel, about how they need short-term and long-term metrics, and I'm really struggling to find any metrics when it comes to racial diversity. Am I just missing it?
Yeah, that is something. Like when I first saw like the roundups of responses that law firms were making, they weren't, and I can understand why they may be hopefully putting together the plans of like how they're going to fix inward in their firms, and like the diversity issue is that in their firms, and kind of like Black lawyers coming into the firm and feeling isolated and leaving the firms because they feel like there's no way for them to be promoted and to be really a part of the firm. I really haven't seen that yet. My hope would be that they would just say, we're not just going to write a check and say like, oh, we have a diversity officer, and not arm them with actually keeping people accountable, the management level. I think that's something that needs to happen. And I think hopefully it doesn't just get lost and kind of like, oh, this is a police brutality issue. It's more of a structural racism issue, and that includes working environments. And law firms, like a lot of job industries, haven't been the most welcoming for diverse talent. And I think that's something that law firms hopefully will start to say, okay, we need to be more concrete on what we're going to do and what our steps are. So I'm starting to see it. I think I saw a local firm in Philadelphia. They, I think, hired a chief diversity officer. So hopefully that's something that you see more of, and they're actually able to implement concrete steps to make Black lawyers feel more encouraged and welcomed and feel like they can build their book of business and feel like it's not a dead end just being an associate in big law or mid-sized law.
Well, Victoria, one theme that I've noticed at a lot of the protests I've gone to is this: not just fill the quotas, but it's put Black people in positions of power on the firms that make the decisions, or on the committees that make the decisions in the firms, and provide them with promotion paths that don't just so they're not just stuck at the bottom. Are you aware of any firms that have actually, I mean, I'm guessing the answer is no, but I wish it was not no, but have actually provided commitments to do that rather than just quotas or create diversity committees?
I haven't seen that yet. My colleagues, maybe on the business of law, they might have a little bit closer of an ear on that topic. But I know a few months ago when I saw an article, I believe on the American Lawyer, where they were talking about with COVID-19 and the recession, could diversity strides that some law firms were making, could that go away when budgets are starting to tighten? And I read that some of the chief diversity officers in a few firms, they said no, because, of course, diversity dipped after the Great Recession, but we think we have more concrete plans. So I think it's still up in the air of what big law will do, and kind of like turning the mirror on themselves and saying like, okay, this is an issue that we have, and it's something maybe that they need to look into, like the law schools that they're recruiting from, making sure when they have like these mentorship programs, is it really doing anything? Are they making sure that they're putting their Black associates in front of clients and building their book of business? So I think hopefully it's something going on. I haven't read about it yet, but hopefully it's something.
So there seems to be, sorry, Bill.
Go ahead.
There's interesting stuff coming from clients. I think some of the pressure is going to come. So obviously we've talked about, there's been some stuff about Intel. So Intel has now said that, and that by 2021, I might have that wrong, but so it might be 22. I think it's 21. But anyway, they've given a concrete diversity statistic that they expect to see this percentage of women and this percent of people of color. So ethnically diverse. They want it to be at least 10% ethnic diversity, and I think that's the right way forward. But I think that the law firms are just not doing enough, and they need pressure from the people who pay the bills. And I think that Microsoft have also put together a really quite impressive program where they have several metrics where they look at in terms of the people that are working on a matter, and they grade their law firms following these metrics, and they've made these. And I think that more clients should be doing that, because actually that's where the law firms will really start to take notice. If they're not doing it themselves, I think the clients have to drive it forward, and obviously some of them are, but I think that needs to be something that there's much more collaboration. And I'd quite like to see some kind of group where there's a way of, I don't know, maybe this exists, kind of collaboration where people pool their ideas and pool, I think there's a strength in numbers aspect of this as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna move on to the next one, only because I know, but both Molly and Nikki have other programs to get to after this is done. But I did just want to point out, I just dropped a link of an article that was on Bloomberg Law this week that looked at some of the statistics around diversity in the legal profession, pulling from U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics data and a few other sources. But it's pretty much as bad as you would think. I mean, it says something like 80% of those in legal occupations, which is a pretty vague term, are white, and 10.6% are Black, and Asians are 8.2%. And then it has some other statistics from some other sources as well. So. Molly, I know you have to get off early, and I wondered if you want to be next up and talk about what was in your mind this week, on your mind this week.
Sure. So offline, we've talked a little bit about this. The University of Pennsylvania, their Actionable Intelligence for Social Policy program released a new toolkit for, this is new for me, centering equity. I'm big into, I understand putting equity and diversity in context and racial in terms of data, but their focus in this report is on centering which is really based on understanding where the data, how the data is collected and how bias is worked into the data collection at its root. And so I thought it was really, one of the things I like about it, they haven't promoted it much because it came out right in the middle of all the demonstrations and protests. It takes a really strong stand on race, and I thought that's important. I thought it actually is more timely now. This isn't in response to the demonstrations. They've been working on this report for 2 years. And one of the reasons I think it's important now is that because of the pandemic, we've seen so many organizations, especially government entities in courts, starting to really very quickly implement technology solutions and data-driven solutions. And this is at a critical time to take a look at when you're using data to drive decision making, that it that you understand where the biases are. It's not that it can't be useful, but you have to make sure that you understand and, as they put it, center your data so that you're not using it in ways that are punitive or lead to unequal treatment and unequal distribution of benefits, say, or in the case of law enforcement, penalizing African Americans and minorities because the data has a lot of racist history in how it was collected. So I just thought that was it's a really helpful, useful toolkit, really long, with a cross section of stakeholders from government and educational institutions.
If you happen to have the URL for that, the URL that was in an email that you sent around about that, for some reason isn't working for me. I'm getting a 404 message when I click on it.
I talked to one of the authors yesterday, and I think they, same for me, they took it down briefly because they found a typo.
Oh. So,
if Above the Law did that, we'd never get anything done.
Yeah.
Well, there's the toolkit they have all this background, but their toolkit is a PDF. So.
Yeah, interesting stuff.
But true.
Yeah. Any comments on that, or do you want to move on to the next?
No, I'd love to see that. So yeah, I'll try and dig out your link as well.
All right, I see she put a link up. Nikki, I know you also have to go do 3 hours of speaking this afternoon. So let's warm up your voice.
Cords. Well, what I've really been focused on a lot is, and I wrote about this for my Above the Law column this week, is the intersection of law and technology in terms of surveillance and the use that the way law enforcement is using technology at the protests, and the different methods and tools that they're using to surveil protesters, to gather information to arrest protesters and also alleged looters. It's amazing the amount of tools that they're using. There's the physical tools, there's the drones, there's those poles where they, when I organized the post-inauguration rally in downtown Rochester, at that point in 2016, they had these poles where they had cameras on top of them. So rather than having law enforcement right there at our protest, there were 1 or 2 officers, but they had those poles to make sure nothing went south with cameras on them. Now they have drones. So when I was at a Black Lives Matter rally last weekend, there were a number of drones, and one of them came down very low once we all settled in one spot, and really annoyed a lot of the protesters because it was pretty low and invasive. But in addition to those, they're also using, license plate readers. They're using social media to try and track protesters and get information. They're using other sorts of data from cell phones that they collect with some sort of tool. I wrote about it on the Above the Law post. The idea was to give protesters an idea of the tools that law enforcement is using, how to lock down their phones. That's another thing that's really important, is learning how to secure your data, your information, how to stop sending information, geolocation data from your phones that might help law enforcement. And my perspective is more help them unlawfully unlawfully restrict the right to protest. That to me is the most important thing. They're restricting the right to protest. It's our constitutional right. And so I think it's important to secure your data so that they don't get information unlawfully from you that can be used against protesters. And so I provided that information. But I think it's all this surveillance they're doing and the militarizing of the police it's unbelievable to attack people that are peacefully protesting about a really important issue. And the other thing I just wanted to mention was I linked to a video. We have a lawyer in Rochester who represents protesters, and I linked to a video that we'd recorded right after the election where he provides information to protesters about your rights when you protest and how to protest lawfully, or at least understand what that means and understand when you're crossing that line and cross that line knowingly. And I also linked to, I just had a birthday, and I, for the first time I ever did a fundraiser for the Bail Project, which its intent is to, address the biased use of bail in the criminal justice system by bailing people out. And so I've raised almost $3,000. I just wanted to throw this pitch in there. I'm like $175 off for my $3,000 goal. It was initially $1,000, but I raised that in about 4 hours, so I pushed it up to $3,000, but I'm still a little bit short of that. So there's a link to that fundraiser if you want to donate to it. It goes right to the Bail Project. I'm just the go-between through Facebook. But I just think it's super interesting, all the tools that the police are using to prevent people from exercising their First Amendment right to protest, and it's a little offensive.
And also, to go back to what Victoria was talking about a little bit, there was a story this week that suggested they're also watching your Twitter accounts. There was a story out of Portland, Maine, that where somebody had posted on Twitter about sort of in favor of defunding the police. And next thing you knew, the police were showing up at his door with an arrest warrant over some misdemeanor graffiti charge or something. And some of what they said to him suggested that they had in fact been aware of what he'd been posting on Twitter. So who knows?
Oh, and the other really important aspect of that is, which I hadn't thought about at the first protest I went to, but the second protest I was aware of it, is blurring faces out of the photos you take to show on social media.
You got to go, Molly. Bye, Molly.
Bye, Molly. See you next week. The Signal offers a tool to do that, the Signal messaging app, so that you can, before you post to social media, blur faces out of the images.
Yeah.
Vicky, did you say you've posted a link to your fundraising? I can't see it on the. You're going to post it in the chat.
Oh, I'll
do a gratuitous plug.
I'll link to Above the Law, and at the very end.
That's the way to do it.
I'll link to my fundraiser too. I'll link to the fundraiser and Above the Law in the chat momentarily.
Yeah. While she's working on that, I'll share my favorite. The government is monitoring your Twitter story. I don't know if people saw this, but I believe a journalist tweeted something out saying, "If I mysteriously disappear, this is why." And what he had done is reached out to the official CIA account saying that he had information on the communication devices that Antifa uses to keep in contact with each other. And they needed to follow him so he could DM them. The CIA official account immediately followed him and asked for the stuff over direct message. And he responded, yes, they are utilizing some sort of technology called UpDog. And they responded with, "What's up, dog?" And he said, "Nothing, what's up with you?" To the official CIA account. And he posted it all on Twitter. And that I don't use the word hero very often, but.
That's good. That's good. You got any other stories this week, Joe, that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of random stuff like that. We have dealt with more bar exams forcing applicants to sign legal waivers that they won't hold them responsible when they all get COVID after packing into a convention center in July. So that's a thing. We've gotten more statements from law firms, as we were talking about earlier, all these social media statements, which kind of to go on to that, one of the trends that we're noticing of those statements is that it's going to spark some what on Twitter is being called like the hashtag #ThisYou, backlash of people who have had negative experiences with those firms going, really? Where was this love of racial justice when I got treated the way I did? And that's developing, and it's going to be an inflection point, I think, for a lot of the firms, because I feel, especially with issues like this, that a lot of firms, and by firms, I'm just going to generally say white people, have a sense that these issues don't exist on a spectrum. They feel as though if I've said I'm for racial justice, that's the end of the inquiry for me. I've done it. There's can't be anything else I can do better than to say that. And I think it's going to be, and when they're called out for other stuff, they tend to go insular and defensive and lash out at the idea that something's wrong. And I think this is the next inflection point that these firms are going to face, is when they, after these statements of support, they get flagged for various microaggressions and so on that they've done over the years. Are they going to become defensive, or are they going to remain open to that conversation about what they can do better? And so that's the other trend that we've been following throughout the week. We've been all over the place this week.
Yeah, been a busy week.
Yeah. But those are the two that are kind of relevant to this conversation. I don't think anybody cares about my Michael Flynn coverage. So
somebody does,
right? It has fewer legal tech angles to it.
Yeah. Any comments?
Michael
on
Avenatti, did you follow that?
No.
Avenatti now he was banned from using his computer because he couldn't have anything that connected to the internet, and the government filed this really bitchy motion saying, it looks like he participated in the drafting of some of the filings in his own defense. That means he must have had a computer. We need him, and they tried to get an inquest going, and the judge was just like, give him a computer, put software on it so he can't go on the internet, just get this out of my face. But that was a tech story of the week.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how about Caroline? How about you? What do you got this week?
It's been a mixed week actually. So I might just do a little short mention of a few things. So one, I wrote again about Zoom, about new vulnerabilities that have been identified, and what was more interesting, I think, than my story, which was just looking at something that Cisco Talis found and wrote about in terms of web security vulnerability, was some of the feedback that I got after it. I got quite a lot of people coming back to me saying, what have you got against Zoom, right? And someone was like saying, you've got an agenda to try and promote Teams, or what? And I was like, actually, well, that's interesting, because you have to listen, perhaps. And they were saying, well, look, quite a few people actually have come back to me and said, I don't think there's enough positive coverage of Zoom and the amazing stuff they've achieved. We've obviously talked quite a bit about Zoom, I think, in the few weeks that we've been talking. I think actually Zoom's probably come up disproportionately, often. But I think that's an interesting thing, that there's the reaction was more of interest to me, that people are saying, we really think that this is saving our life, and what have you got against it? And I'm like, okay, I'm not against it, just fix, and I should mention that the thing about the article was that the whole point of the article was that you need that although Zoom is doing its own patches, that you can't just rely on that you need to make sure you're using the latest version of the software, and there's some assumption at the user end that Zoom is fixing all of the stuff, when actually you need to make sure you're on 5.0, you've got the latest, or else the vulnerabilities, or else you won't be protected from the vulnerabilities, which kind of goes without saying, but perhaps not obvious to everybody. There's a new app to help people get back to the office, which is like a kind of space design type app from Fliplet, which is really interesting. They can kind of create zones on different floors and work out who's in, who's out, and you log in with a you sort of scan a QR code to get in, and there's a lot of interest in that from law firms who, although obviously some people are saying they're going to continue to work from home, they're obviously now really working out how the hell they achieve meaningful social distancing, and also monitoring in terms of if somebody gets sick. So they're now into the weeds of really thinking about the how they're actually going to achieve this, and there's quite a lot of interest in that. There's quite a lot of movement, which is interesting, and people taking up new jobs, which is quite an interesting time. That's to me, I think that we're kind of getting into the, lockdown is normal. It feels like there's a bit more movement in the jobs market. People are being promoted. Obviously, there's there's still a lot of people being furloughed, and obviously, I'm not suggesting that things are better, but actually, there's a lot more movement. You're agreeing, Bob. You've obviously seen some people
Yeah. Just today we saw Haley Altman, the announcement of Haley Altman moving up at Laterra, and it's
which is great. And as I said, all her karaoke crew will be a fan of that. It's great to see. It's a thing, it's nice to see some positive. There's been some positive. There's been some IT director moves in the UK. Tony McKenna's left Gowlings to join Hal Kennedy. It's felt like quite a normal week by COVID standards.
I thought the one piece of news this week that kind of was more consistent with the times, but something we all saw coming was that ILTACon will in fact be virtual. I mean, I think we all knew that was going to happen, but they made it official this week, and promising bigger and even better in all virtual environment. One of the big conferences of the fall that we haven't yet heard from officially on that is the ClioCon conference, which I know, Nikki, is one of your favorite conferences to go to. Joking. But I was on a webinar with Joshua Lennon from Clio this week, and he did say there's going to be news coming very soon about the state of the ClioCon conference. So I'm guessing we're going to hear shortly that they're going to decide to have that be virtual as well. But I'm seeing actually in Europe that some conferences are now trying to start back up as physical conferences for the fall. There's one in Prague in September that I'm scheduled to speak at, I guess. I don't know whether I can get there, but they're going to make a go for doing a live physical conference. So
when do you? I was just talking to someone else about this. When would you personally be comfortable going to a conference like that? I mean, granted, it's fluid, right? Like, you never know what it's going to be like, but I feel like I'm not there anytime soon. I don't know. I mean, I'm wondering about like Legal Tech and Tech Show next year. Like, I'm wondering if those are going to go forward. What do you guys think?
So I'll say this, and obviously you don't know what all's going on, but I have been, a few people have told me that who work in government adjacent jobs that CDC officials are briefing them that they should plan on February being all clear. That they believe that the CDC, for what it's worth, reportedly is saying to officials that they expect vaccine distribution to begin in December and to be all clear in February. So that's what the CDC is telling like universities and stuff.
Wow.
So who knows whether that's true? Obviously they can be wrong. And I'm, that's just reportedly what I'm hearing from the academic sector, but yeah.
Yeah. I went to a restaurant last night for the first time in 3 months or something. So that was exciting. And had to sit outside, and it was cold as hell because it was raining, and they had a roof over us, but it was
But they're open. That's amazing. We're
just this week. Yeah, just this week they opened some restaurants for only outdoor seating in Massachusetts where I am.
Amazing.
So we're outdoor seating. We're outdoor seating for now, but I think my area is scheduled to go indoor like next week, I think.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I think upstate New York it's today.
Yeah, I think you guys are today.
Yeah.
We're July, I think. They've said not till sometime in July that bars but Bob, what did you make of Ilta's the event? I mean, I thought it was interesting. I'm really so fascinated to see how that they've obviously talked about lots of social events online and creating, trying to emulate some of the stuff that we know is so brilliant about Ilta in terms of the networking and the social stuff. I can't wait to see how they do it, but it's some of the stuff that they were talking about in terms of the drinks, the taste. I think they even mentioned something like tasting, did they? Or maybe I made that up, but like all these kind of social things. And I'm like, how the hell are we going to achieve that online? I hope that we can, because everyone's going to be really sad not to go ahead. But I just can't.
Tio.
Yeah.
I'll talk about this another week, but
yeah. I mean, the few
yeah,
virtual
sorry.
conference, the ones I've been to, it's been the whole networking part of it has kind of been a fail so far. The presentations are good, and it's nice that you're able to open it up to a lot more people who wouldn't be able to attend the physical conference. But as a networking event, it ain't the same, I got to say.
And it's great. I mean, that's what's so fascinating is that I haven't seen with other conferences that they haven't really promised that, you know. But I actually missed what you're saying, Nikki. You're talking about TA, which we still didn't really talk about, which is when you have your own avatar, obviously, on this platform, which I haven't yet played around with. But.
Yeah, we didn't get to. We actually had a question on Twitter about what is the preferred way for companies to present a potential story or get a new product solution covered? I guess, in other words, how do you like people to pitch stories to you is basically the question. But we are running, we are going on an hour here, and I think we need to call it quits. So maybe we can make that top of list for next week and give Jason an answer to his question that he posted on Twitter. But yeah, sound good?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah,
Sounds
I know
good.
everybody's good. All right, well, thanks everybody for participating again. Thanks everybody in the audience for listening, and we'll be back next Friday at a time to be determined, I guess.
Early.
All right.
You like early? Okay. All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Nice to see
See you
everyone.
now.
Thanks,
Thanks
guys.
for listening. Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye.